Loud and proud, week number 7 of college football is here. Let's Bet It is live by Superbook Sports with Mark Zinno. I'm David Gascon. Thanks for joining us today. Mark, TikTok is back for you. Your fantasy football team is knee-deep in some trash. And then you're repping some Pickswise material, man. I don't know where to come at you on something like this on a week 7 weekend, but good to see you, of course, and ready to get back at it.
Yeah, TikTok is still one of the more difficult challenges I have at this stage of my life. I'm starting to put out TikTok videos every Friday on college football parlays, and it literally takes me like 45 minutes to put out a 30-second video. So the ratio is not going well for me. But on to bigger and better things than a huge Saturday in college football.
Yeah, man, we got lots of things to chew on. Obviously, we got our pick of the day, a handful of games that we'll be taking a look at. Obviously, the Heisman Trophy race is getting knee-deep into it with a couple guys going up against each other today. With all that being said, we're getting close. We're getting close to seeing how this thing with the college football playoff will be divided up. How are you feeling about all of it?
I mean, I think certain teams have established a very clear path to, when the first rankings come out, to being part of the top 6. Obviously Georgia and Alabama are going to be there. Even if they take a loss, they're probably still going to be there, either one of those teams, although I don't expect it to happen. That said, I think Ohio State obviously is going to be there, but then you look at the other 3 options that could be out there. USC is in the driver's seat. They sort of control their own destiny. You look at the Big 12, Oklahoma State, TCU. Both of those teams could be in there as they will meet today. One may get in over the other depending on the outcome of today. But then you have a variety of other teams out there that really could make some noise. Clemson obviously can get there. Tennessee may be able to hang around, provided what they do today. If the game is close enough, maybe the committee will, look more into optics than necessarily results. So, once you get past the top 3 of Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State, you start to really get a chance to feel out where people are and where people think teams will be going forward. But this week probably has a long way to go in that decision.
Fans, you can also follow us online on Twitter. Make sure you subscribe, click the like button, do the same thing on Twitter. And also, you can ask for the Wise and Shine newsletter that's provided every day of the week. Obviously, get great material on National Football League, college football, the National Hockey League, the NBA. Got all kinds of things going down right now in the month of October before we get into November. With that being said, let's bet it. Mark, we go into a couple pivotal games today, one in particular, the SEC, where Nick Saban's not going to see a mobile quarterback. He's going to see a dual threat quarterback. And that, over the course of his long career, has given him some problems. So you got Tennessee and Alabama today. Lots of things to like about a ball game like this.
Certainly is. And people have been writing the wrong storyline all week long, which is Hendon Hooker and his Heisman, opportunity here against Alabama to go out and finally snap this losing streak of 15 consecutive games. In fact, Nick Saban, as the head coach of Alabama, has never lost to Tennessee. And that's what everybody's focused on. But what they really needed to be focused on is how bad this Tennessee Vols pass defense is and how susceptible they are to being beaten. Just go look at the last 2 SEC quarterbacks that they've played. Jaden Daniels in LSU and Anthony Richardson of Florida. Richardson threw for 457 yards. Jaden Daniels threw for 300. This is the same Jaden Daniels that threw for 80 yards in an SEC game because he flat out just doesn't throw the ball, and they were able to take advantage. I know Tennessee won that game big, and they certainly deserve to win it, but it's still a problem. Whether it's Jalen Milroe, and now it looks like, David, it's going to be Bryce Young. By all accounts, Nick Saban came out this morning and said Bryce Young should start today, and we've seen the line movement happen already. Bryce Young against this defense is a bloodbath. He is going to torch this team through the secondary. You don't need John Mechie and Jamison Williams to beat up this Vols secondary. They have good enough receivers. They have a good enough quarterback. I said Bama earlier in the week at -7. This line is now up to like 8.5 or 9 in certain spots. I just can't get past how bad this Volunteer defense is. And you're giving me Nick Saban and Alabama less than double digits. I'm not passing that up. I'm backing the Tide today all the way.
You backed them up, but one thing that people need to look at is that total. That total has been pushed around a little bit. At 66, Sure. Are you comfortable with that number and chasing the over?
I actually think the under comes in. Just based off of the fact that these teams are going to be throwing more than necessarily they're running, although I'm not really sure Alabama should. Jahmyr Gibbs should get the ball more than anything because he's the most dynamic playmaker on that offense, to say the least. But, with incompletions and the Bama defense and everything, you could see some more 3-and-outs. I don't think there'll be a ton of scoring. Look, remember, they can get to 34-30 in this game, and it can be a fun, exciting game to watch. It still stays under the total. So, I mean, you're going to need a lot of perfection on offense, which you might not get today.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating. You mentioned with Bryce Young, did not play last week. Gibbs, obviously a guy that you can use out of the big backfield multiple ways. In a game like this, you could be inclined, if you're Nick Saban, to use Gibbs early on to establish the ground game, and then all of a sudden you don't have to call upon Bryce Young and his injured shoulder to make some big plays unless you need it, especially late in the second quarter before the end of the first half, or in a ball of the game that could be tight. I know you don't see it that way, but nevertheless, you can protect your biggest asset right now, especially when you get into the meat of the SEC. With that being said, you mentioned it. Obviously, Alabama's dominated this matchup. You look at what they do against the number. Alabama 5-1 against the spread in their last 6 against Tennessee. Moving from the SEC to a fascinating game right now in the Big Ten. Michigan and Penn State. And for Michigan, you had talked about this a few weeks ago about their offense flying high, but not playing a lot of great teams, not Power 5 teams to open up the season. Nevertheless, taking care of business for Jim Harbaugh. And now it seems like they have found their quarterback. On the other side of things, Penn State, they have been under the radar and now building up that record and that resume of the Big Ten. Then you get the national attention, 10th in the nation ranked. This team, this matchup against Michigan, how do you see it play out?
Well, I think the punters are going to have a huge day. I expect a ton of defense. When this number was posted at 52, my jaw hit the table going, are you kidding me? That was a gift, and that gift is long gone. You're not getting anywhere in the 50s again. I think it's at 49 settling in there right about now. It might even drop to 48.5 by kickoff. I'd still probably play the under because I don't think either one of these teams are getting to 25. This is going to be an extremely low-scoring game. So I initially loved the under, and up on the Pickswise website earlier in the week when I posted the pick and it was still at 52, 51.5, whatever was out there, I loved the under. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think Michigan's offense is a little bit of a paper tiger. They scored 51 points a game in their non-conference schedule. They get into the Big Ten schedule, and they're only scoring 30. They only scored 30. They're averaging 30 against teams like Maryland and Indiana, who are two of the worst defenses in the Big Ten last year. Penn State's defense, very, very good. Top 5 rush defense in the nation. They should be able to contain Blake Corum, who's third in the nation in rushing yards for Michigan. He's going to have a day, but he's not going to have a huge day. So Penn State will be able to contain him. This is a Penn State team that also runs the ball very well with the freshman running back Nicholas Singleton. He's averaging 7.8 yards per carry. He's pacing the lines to 192 yards a game on the ground. This will be a ground and pound, beat 'em up, old-fashioned Big Ten style of football game where not a lot of points are going to be scored. Give the edge at quarterback, though, to super senior Sean Clifford of Penn State over J.J. McCarthy. I think that'll be the difference in the game. One guy's going to make a couple more plays under center, a couple more throws that matter here. Love Penn State to stay within this 7 as well. Don't know if they can win this game outright, but I don't trust Michigan's offense enough to be able to win this thing by more than a touchdown.
Yeah, you mentioned it with Clifford. He had double-digit points coming his way against Northwestern. They didn't cover the spread in that contest. But a different animal, obviously, going up, and he raised the stakes against the Michigan team that's amongst the best in the nation. On the other side of things, Oklahoma State and TCU, we talked about this off the air last week. And for me, Kansas was one of my pick of the days. I just liked what they have done to open up the season. We'll talk about them later. They covered that line against TCU. Actually thought TCU would be blowing them out. But now they go into a game like this against Oklahoma State, where obviously the tensions will be high. Oklahoma State last year, for all intents and purposes, blew their shot at a college football playoff. This game is a different beast, obviously, for these two squads. TCU getting the national attention right now. Many people didn't think they'd be in this position, but they are now, right?
They are, and no, not many people thought they would. And they're there because of their quarterback, Max Duggan, who has been absolutely phenomenal this year all around. Earlier in the week, when I first looked at this game, David, my reaction was to go right to TCU because of their offense and how well they've played. But, I started digging into the numbers a little bit more, and I flipped them back in Oklahoma State today, especially getting the points they are. Now it's up to 4.5. It was at 3.5 earlier in the week. Yeah. This is just a Oklahoma State defense that's just slightly better against the run. And that's a lot of what TCU is predicated on is the run. Plus, look at the TCU Horned Frogs and what they've done in the last 2 weeks. They had to go beat Oklahoma. They did that. They went on the road to beat Kansas. Now they're playing their third consecutive ranked Big 12 opponent. There's got to be some fatigue setting in there. I know that Oklahoma State was pushed last week by Texas Tech, but they still ended up pushing that number if you got it at 10 or 10 and a half. Obviously, you're on the wrong side. But I just look at TCU here in this spot and go, how much more of this can they take as far as having to play at this high of a near perfect level for week after week after week? I think Oklahoma State takes advantage. And I don't really see this game, the spread mattering there, David. I mean, if TCU is going to win this thing, they'll do it by a touchdown. Otherwise, Oklahoma State wins outright. I have a hard time seeing TCU only winning by a field goal with these offenses. They run and gun, they score fast. And, I do wonder how much that TCU defense is going to be able to slow down Spencer Sanders and this high-powered Oklahoma State offense.
Yeah, Spencer Sanders has played well this season in 2022. And you look at the total, to your point, 68.5. The TCU was favored at one point at 4. But, yeah, you think about the emotions of a 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and they have to get up each and every week. And you mentioned, obviously, in the Big 12, not only do you have to get up, but you have to make sure that you're mixing and matching point for point with the opposition. A lot to ask for. You have on one side of things, though, with TCU going up against an Oklahoma offense and defense that has not fared well in recent weeks. Clemson and Florida State. This is going to be a big matchup for Clemson in a couple of different ways. Obviously, they're trying to keep pace with everybody else amongst the top and that national contention for a playoff spot. But DJ Uiagalelei is starting to push himself, and you can see his statistical categories rising. Yards, touchdowns, the interception total is low as well. Not flashy by a stretch of the imagination, but it feels like Clemson now has their guy. Where in the first couple weeks, a lot of curiosity, a lot of question marks behind their signal caller.
Yeah, Florida State had a great September. Mike Norvell and company looked like they were on the way back, right, after everything they won. You have to remember one thing about the month of September, and I still think this changes the view of things dramatically. Had LSU's idiot kicker not missed that extra point in the opener, I think we view – and it goes to overtime and LSU wins that thing. I think we view Florida State a little bit differently. That said, Florida State now is on their third consecutive ranked conference opponent, much like TCU, as we just talked about. But this is the best of all of them. Clemson's defense, rush defense, only allows 64 yards a game on the ground. That's the second-ranked run defense in the nation. So that leaves it up to FSU quarterback Jordan Travis, who struggled last week against a tough NC State defense. Clemson's offense is scoring 38.5 points a game here. They've won 6 in a row against Florida State. And other than the game against Wake Forest, where Clemson was pushed to the very limit, they're only giving up 20 points a game within conference play. So I know that Clemson has become a very public bet. When I had to write this up on the website earlier in the week, obviously you don't see how much of the disparity in the tickets and the amount of money and handle that comes in. You don't really get a full picture on. So I'm a little bit wary of it, full disclosure, just because so much of the public has come in to back Florida State at such a short number at 3.5. But I still have a hard time believing that Florida State's defense, as good as it is, as you just mentioned, David, DJ Uiagalelei is really turning it on right now. Like, he's playing at a much better level than anybody could have ever expected him at this point last year. I mean, the numbers bear that out. And I really do believe that he is enough to carry this team over. Florida State will get some stops today against Clemson. There's no doubt about that. I like the under in this game as well. But this is a short enough number here where I think Clemson takes it home. I think we're all looking for these spots where these undefeated teams are going to fall, and this looks like a prime one on the road for Clemson. I just think they're flat out better than Florida State by a considerable margin.
Yeah, Clemson 3.5-point favorites as they travel to Florida State to take on the Seminoles. Mark, I'm going to pause real quick on that before we get to our next game. And because you mentioned it, when you look at public teams that get a ton of money and draw their way, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, USC, at times Oklahoma, if everything's right, how do you prevent yourself as a gambler from dipping too much into the favorites, into those public teams, and making sure that you look deeper into them over the course of a season as opposed to just that number and say, hey, USC or Oklahoma or Alabama or Georgia, small favorites, 3 or 4 on the road. How do you prevent yourself from being so deep into that team, the public teams, and going the other way?
Well, a lot of it I think is situational. But again, the lines always are what they are for a reason. So odds makers are telling you that Florida State is closer to Clemson than many people think, because a lot of people, not even rookie handicappers would have probably thought that number would have been around a touchdown, right? Like, rookie bettors would have said, okay, Clemson by a touchdown. But you have to dive a little bit deeper here. I think you have to look at, when it comes to things like the public, certain players and matchups and things of that nature. For me in this particular one, it's DJ Uiagalelei, who I think is really going to be the catalyst to push Clemson over the top today. If he plays a perfect game, which he's very capable of, and doesn't turn the ball over and doesn't make mistakes, he's going to be good enough to get Clemson the points that they need, I think, to cover this number. Now, is 3.5 the perfect number? Because could Clemson win by 3? Yes. But I'm always wary of public teams and public bets. I think you have to be to a certain extent. I knew that this number was short, and I did so and I thought it was short for a reason, because they were going on the road. And as I said, there's a propensity with these undefeated teams to think that eventually they're going to get snapped, right? How much longer can they continue to win and win big? All of them come back down to earth to a certain extent. So the public doesn't necessarily take that into account. And that's why you get a disparity in tickets and in handle on one side other than the other. But I'm somebody who's always wary of where the public is. It won't necessarily sway me 100% in one direction or the other, but it's sort of validation. If the public is on one side and I'm sitting on the other, I feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah, Vegas didn't build those hotels by backing Joe Public, so that's obviously the case. We go back out west now, and Salt Lake City, Utah, we go with the Utah Utes and the USC Trojans. This is a massive game for the Trojans, obviously trying to resurrect the Pac-12 conference as a whole. They're on the road in Utah, but they're dogs. 3.5-point favorites of the Utah Utes that sit at 4-2 so far this season. It's a curious spot. Obviously, Caleb Williams is in the Heisman Trophy race, but Travis Dye has been their unsung hero for large portions of this year.
Yeah, I mean, the USC running game has really helped develop this passing game for Lincoln Riley's offense. Look, I think USC still, surprisingly, is one of the more undervalued teams in all of college football. Based on their defense alone, I think they're better than Tennessee. Their offense is better than Michigan's. Like, there's an argument for them to be inside the top 5, and they're not. Do I think they're playing with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because of it? Sure, maybe. But I also think that they have their sights set on bigger things that not many people thought that they could do. This is a USC offense that is top 25 overall, top 20 in yards per play, and top 10 in scoring every week this year. There have been several spots this year where a lot of people thought USC would get tripped up. Hey, they're not really that good. They're not for real yet. And other than the Oregon State game on the road in Oregon State, a 17-14 final that USC got out of there with a win, they've pulled away from everybody this year. Now, the flip side for Utah, their season is on the line. Obviously, no 2-loss team has ever made the college football playoff. Guess what? That means no 3-loss team is ever going to make the college football playoff. So they are literally fighting for their playoff lives at this point in time. Head coach Kyle Whittingham is known for making Utah the most physical team in the Pac-12. They beat people up, they smack them around, and nobody else knows what to do. But that's not been the case this year for Utah. Their physical style and their running game with Tavion Thomas has just not met the physical level that it did last year. There's something a little bit off. Thomas is averaging his lowest yards per carry of his career at 4.5, and he's rushed for just 386 yards through 6 games this year. Now, the Utes defense is still very strong, but they did give up 42 points last week to UCLA, and this is a USC offense that they haven't faced as one that's this accomplished yet this year. As you mentioned, Travis Dye beat you a variety of ways. USC is 10th in the nation in third down conversion at 52%. And by the way, the Utes last week allowed UCLA to convert 55% of their third down conversion. I think the wrong team is favored here. Despite Cam Rising and how good he's been, USC is going to win this game outright. Another game where I don't think the spread matters. If Utah wins this, it's by a touchdown because USC made a ton of mistakes and beat themselves. Other than that, this is not only a Utah money line, but I'll back them with 3.5 as well. Love USC today.
Yeah, USC 1-4 in Utah in their last 5 matchups, but obviously massive for the Trojans to obviously keep pace with Alabama, with Georgia, some of the premier teams, and all the land of college football for those 4 playoff spots. You're looking at the Pac-12 conference right now with the odds-on favorites to win it all. It's not USC. It's the Oregon Ducks led by Bo Nix. Does that surprise you at all?
Not after last week. Taking on Arizona and beating that team handily. And I was on Arizona last week. We did the same show together. right? Remember,
Yeah.
my 3-star play today on the website I allowed you to have, and this was my second play was Arizona. I'm trying to take credit myself here, David. Thank you, allowing for me to be so humble. But I thought Arizona would have a much better showing and cover that 13.5. They got their doors blown off. And guess what? Bo Nix was good in a road game, which has not been the case for him this entire career. Maybe Green suits him well. Maybe the Pacific Northwest works a lot better than the SEC does. Whatever it is, he's played a lot better and he's been a lot more consistent, and that's part of the reason. Long gone is the Oregon team that got smoked in week 1 by Georgia, and they also are another team with a clear path to the college football playoff. They just don't have any more room for error. As I said earlier, no 2-loss team has ever made the college football playoff. So if they get tripped up one more time, they can still be in the Pac-12 championship game, still win it, but they'll probably be on the outside looking in when it's all said and done. So all that together, I understand why there is backing of Oregon. And oh, by the way, this guy's got a ticket on Oregon over 8.5 wins. So I was high on Oregon all year long coming into this season, and I thought they would be exactly where they are.
I got to give you a medal for just backing Bo Nix all the way together, man. That's pretty ballsy of yourself. And that leads us to the cash, trash, or play, right? We're looking at one team to cash, one team to trash, and another one to play. So give me, who do you got? We'll stay in the Pac-12 conference if you don't mind.
Well, we just talked about them. I'll cash Oregon because of what they've done so far and how accomplished they've been. They've rebounded so well from that opening loss to Georgia, and I think that's super important because they've come back and never let it phase them. And it's easy for a rookie head coach to get distraught after a beating like that, but Dan Lanning has done an amazing job with this Oregon Ducks program. I'm trashing Utah. Why? Because they're going to lose today. So there's no reason for me to put money on them. They're going to get their third loss this season, and that means I'm playing USC. I can remember way back in the early part of the summer when odds started coming out, and USC sat at 25-1 to win the national title. And I explained why they could win the Pac-12, and if they win the Pac-12, that they would absolutely be in the college football playoff. All of that still holds true. I know we're talking about the Pac-12 only here, but USC, again, controls their own destiny, and their defense really is what has been the difference. I know people talk about turnovers, and they aren't predictive per se, but college teams that get them on the regular get them for a reason because they're more talented than their opponent. And I still think that's the case today, that USC secondary is more talented than Utah's passing game. They should be able to steal another couple of turnovers today, so I'll play USC, trash Utah, and cash on Oregon.
Well, I'm going to cash the USC Trojans. I've liked them from day one, obviously with Lincoln Riley coming in. So just a different piece you've had. Something you haven't seen in Southern California since the Pete Carroll days with Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and Lendell White. A team that can get you turnovers, extra possessions, is going to win you a lot of ball games. And for all intents and purposes, you look at the Pac-12 as a whole, not a lot of great defenses across the conference. UCLA, Utah, at times maybe Oregon, but not a lot of stifling defenses. And because of that, I feel like when you get into the playoff format, or at least the conference game, you win that conference title game, you're pushing yourself in there. The Pac-12 has not been existent in the college football playoff format. And so for USC, that is my team going in. Caleb Williams has been playing lights out. He had some turbulent times with Oklahoma. Obviously, you didn't know if he was staying with the program. Now he makes his way out west, changing scenery, like you mentioned, with a couple of guys with their NCAA careers. Jordan Addison. We haven't even talked about Addison too much, and it's a guy that was dominant at Pitt coming to Southern California. I like USC, and I like them, obviously, to cash. Trashing, I'm not going to go with Utah. I feel like, as you mentioned, they've had their chance, and they've obviously blew an opportunity at Florida to open up the season. Last week against UCLA was not impressive at all. I'm going to trash Oregon. I mean, I can't back a team with Bo Nix. At times, they've looked relatively weak. They open up the season soft, and a team that can't push people around up front on a consistent basis, I could never back them. Now, I will support you and your ticket for going over 8.5. I will say that with the Oregon Ducks, but I'm not going to pick them to win the Pac-12 conference. The one team I want to play is the UCLA Bruins. And it's part of the reason why I picked them last week for the pick of the day. Same reason why you did. It's not because of DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, as the quarterback. It's because he's the dual threat guy. And you see this throughout college football, whether it's at Clemson with Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence, whether it's Alabama and Bryce Young, whether it's Texas with Vince Young back in the day. When you have a quarterback that's a dual threat guy that can find wide open receivers on a first or second read, or you could hand the ball off to Zach Charbonnet. That is a triple threat in the backfield. And UCLA's defense, as we mentioned last week, was second in the conference in total defense. Yards, passing against, run defense. Chip Kelly's got his things moving in the right direction for the UCLA Bruins. And finally, they're getting people at the Rose Bowl to support their team. That was part of the reason why I liked them against Utah, is because when you put them up, then all of a sudden you're trying to chase against them. They can run out the clock without even having to throw the football down the field, not asking for too much from DTR. So I'm going to play the UCLA Bruins, cash USC, and trash your measly little Oregon Ducks. Pivoting away from the Pac-12, but staying with that Heisman Trophy talk. A couple guys from Southern California, C.J. Stroud, DJ Uiagalelei, Bryce Young, obviously playing his ball at Mater Dei and at Cathedral High School. But Hendon Hooker, I know he's going to be in a dogfight today against Alabama. Is there anyone on that board amongst the Heisman Trophy favorites that you like right now that you could take a waiver on this late in the season?
Well, all those guys that you mentioned, with the exception of C.J. Stroud, have a chance to increase their Heisman odds this week. C.J. Stroud doesn't because he's not playing, so he'll stay pretty static. Some of these guys can close the gap. But for Hendon Hooker, in one of these next couple of weeks, when he plays Alabama and when he plays Georgia, if he can steal a win, if he can lead the Volunteers to an upset victory, his Heisman odds are going to catapult and drop precipitously, like to the point where he may become the second favorite. And you're talking right now, he's at 14-1. He may get down to 8-1 to 7-1 if he can pull off those upsets. That's a huge if. I personally don't think he can. That said, I'm still looking at Bryce Young right now as the guy who is sort of lagging in odds. And obviously he got hurt and he didn't play last week, but he can come back this week, have a huge statement win, throw for 400 yards against a really bad Tennessee Volunteers pass defense, and reinsert himself into this conversation. Other than that, still for me, it's Caleb Williams. I don't think Ohio State's going to lose at any point in time, but if he keeps putting up the numbers he does with the offense that he has and the way USC is playing, because sometimes this is a team award as much as it is an individual one, your team has to be really, really good, and he's on a team that is really, really good. So Williams is really the only other guy that I could see really trying to steal this away from C.J. Stroud.
And if I got to put a little bit of money on DTR, just for the simple fact that if UCLA can at least win out, get to the Pac-12 title game, he's going to get massive national attention out west that he'll take away from what Caleb Williams is doing at USC. And that rivalry game's in a couple weeks from now anyway, so you'll have that attention on the spotlight of those two teams in Southern California anyway. You look at the odds for him, he's at plus 1,600. You're not asking for a lot of money to put on him, and given the fact that we've seen some funky things throughout the year of football, whether it's the National Football League or college football, not a bad decision. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, I think it was last week, that you took a little bit of money on C.J. Stroud, and this is when he was a big dog when it came to Heisman Trophy consideration, no?
Yeah, I mean, when he was plus 350 before the season started, because as soon as he threw a pass in anger this year, that number was going to be gone. And certain enough it was. Yeah. It was the only guy to bet preseason, in my opinion. So, I can hedge a little bit here if I see an opportunity where I think somebody really could steal it from him. Right now, I don't see that. I don't think anybody has a legitimate chance. Again, if Hendon Hooker ends up beating, Alabama, and in some crazy world, if he beats Alabama and Georgia, yeah, that might lock up his Heisman candidacy right there. I mean, as it is right now, he probably has a seat in New York when it's all said and done, as long as he just continues to play well, even if they don't beat Alabama and Georgia. So, he's going to be there, but until I see a real legitimate threat, I don't see a reason to hedge.
Well, speaking of playing, Let's Bet is presented by Superbook Sports. And go to superbook.com or download the app today. And this season, we're all rooting for safeties. That's right, safeties. That's because Superbook will give you a $50 bonus on each safety scored this season. Just place a $100 pregame bet on any spread or total, and if there's a safety scored in any game on Sunday, you get a $50 bonus. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. I don't know, man. Mark, we've had some weird things happen in the National Football League. Denver and Indianapolis a couple weeks ago, that dreadful Thursday night game. Perfect compliment. You get Washington and Chicago, and Al Michaels taking some shots at Daniel Snyder during the contest as well. National Football League, we got some drama, obviously, with Dak Prescott. We'll see what the Dallas Cowboys do. The NFC East has turned into a beast again. But sticking with college ball, got to look at our picks of the day. Where are we going? What do you like, and where are we seeing some value at?
Well, it's one of 2 3-star plays I have up on the website for this week at Pickswise.com. But again, I'm going to back USC here. I still think they're a very undervalued team. I think defensively they're better than Tennessee. Offensively, they're better than Michigan. There's an argument for this team to be in the top 5. Their offense is top 25 overall, top 20 in yards per play, and top 10 in scoring. I know Utah has always been a tough physical team, and their defense is tough and physical. But this is a Utes defense that gave up 42 points last week to UCLA, and they have not seen a quarterback the level of Caleb Williams this year, nor that they faced a wide receiver the level of last year's Blitnikoff Award winner in Jordan Addison. USC 10th in the nation in third down conversion, converting 52%. Last week, the Utes allowed UCLA to convert on 55% of their third down conversions. This is an opportunistic USC defense. They'll take the ball away from Cam Rising. They lead the Pac-12 with 12 interceptions. This is enough here for me to not only back USC with the 3.5, but I'll put a couple dollar bills on the money line as well. Love the USC Trojans today to pull off the mini upset of the Utah Utes.
Yeah, I liked Kansas last week, and for the sheer reason that they have been playing lights out ball, and no one has even seen them on the radar from a national perspective. But all of a sudden, they fell to TCU. I'm actually going to take Kansas and Oklahoma's over in this ball game. The over right now, the over under is 65, but it was pushed up from 64 to 64.5, down to 65. Jalen Daniels is not playing. Jason Bean will be the signal caller for Kansas moving forward, but they're scoring over 30 points per game. Venables' defense is non-existent. You look at the body of work over the last 3 weeks, they've given up over 40 points per game. You mentioned that contest against TCU. Kansas State slapped them around as well. They've had all kinds of issues. And, of course, the Texas Longhorns, that Red River rivalry that we mentioned last week, put 49 on them, a 49-0 drubbing. With Dylan Gabriel back today, that'll at least get their offense in gear. I expect them to put some points up today. They are a pretty big favorite against the Kansas Jayhawks. With that being said, I'm still going to take the over in this one because it is Oklahoma. It is their defense. Can't stop a high school football team. Let's take this one to the bank. I'm going to try to go 3-0 out of the gate as a new inductee into the Pickswise family, Mark. So hopefully next week, if this does happen, you can sing my praise a little bit.
Listen, stay hot, man. It's all that matters. Doesn't matter how you get there. Just results-based business, right? Keep winning, keep handing out winners, and we'll all be happy.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, make sure you follow us on YouTube, Pickswise account, Twitter, the same thing as well. Wise and Shine, the daily newsletter. Obviously, Mark publishing his work throughout the week as well. College football, National Football League, Major League Baseball postseason action, and of course, the National Hockey League and the NBA getting themselves underway as well. So for Mark Zinno, I'm David Gascon. Thanks for joining us again for Let's Bet It. Week number 7, college football. Good luck to you all. We'll see you next week.